Couple disclaimers before we start the video. Do not, under any circumstances, allow Ian Flynn to view the content of this video. While I try to be fairly vague about my ideas, they do kind of cross that line of fan ideas at times, especially when we start talking about the Black Arms. I also forgot to talk about the Shadow Androids for a number of reasons. They are such a footnote in this game that I forgot they even existed until I had already finished writing the script and fully voiced it. IDW also did significantly more with the concept of Shadow Androids than this game ever did, and will be continuing to do so in issue 59. So there's honestly no reason for me to go back and try and salvage them, because they've already been salvaged by official canon media. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video. Shadow the Hedgehog is a mess of a game, but it isn't unsalvageable, and it certainly shouldn't be ignored or brushed off as that weird edgy game that happened in 2005. There's some good ideas here, and concepts that deserve to be revisited and improved upon for future installments. For example, every member of the extended cast, aside from Metal Sonic and Big the Cat, is given a little something to do. Cream is featured in a mission where you have to rescue her and Cheese. The Chaotix are out there trying to solve the Ark's mysteries. Omega is acting on his grudge with Eggman. All these characters are still involved with the game, even if they aren't fully playable or have massive roles. Today we'll be talking about the elements of Shadow that do work, or could work with some tweaks, and what could be done to optimize those elements for future games. Starting with a big point of contention within the Sonic fanbase, Sonic and Shadow's dynamic. To be specific, Sonic and Shadow's dynamic on the semi-hero route. The way these two interact with each other on this route is a delight. Sonic is almost always excited and happy to see Shadow.
Now that was sweet, Shadow!
Yeah, well, I'm not here to save you.
Thought you might say something like that. How about a little friendly competition?
Don't waste my time.
But Shadow is annoyed by his very presence. Shadow is treating this world-ending threat with the gravitas it deserves, while our spiky blue boy is having the time of his life, which, while genuine to a degree, kinda feels like Sonic is putting on a bit of an act. Which, in an ideal dynamic between the two, is what he thinks Shadow needs to deal with his trauma. Just like how he recognizes that Whisper needs her space in the IDW comics. This is why Sonic is constantly trying to make everything with Shadow a competition. It keeps Shadow grounded and keeps him on the path of doing the right thing, even if Shadow himself won't admit it, or Sonic comes off as insensitive to the audience. We kind of get this dynamic back in Team Sonic Racing, but it doesn't work nearly as well. I think Sonic treats Shadow like him working alongside Eggman is a common occurrence, which only happens when a bigger threat comes along that forces their union, like Eggman Nega. Shadow also gives into Sonic's taunting in that game a bit too easily, and his ego in that betrayal is too overblown. Then way later on, he starts trying to get Sonic to focus on stopping Eggman, when the order of events should have been the other way around. Sonic wants to treat the races like a game. Shadow tries to focus on stopping Eggman. Sonic keeps trying to get under his skin, and eventually succeeds. In the future, characters every once in a while should question Sonic directly about why he acts the way he does around Shadow, which his answers should be along the lines of, it's fun, and Shadow won't really talk to him otherwise. Because he's not that type of person. I actually agree with Sega, he's not really the type of person that talks about his feelings willingly. You kinda have to poke and prod at him to force him to do so. By engaging with Sonic on this route, Shadow actually starts to remember the events of SA2. Ideally, Shadow would begrudgingly go along with Sonic's antics, since he recognizes it furthers his own goals, and Sonic is persistent. To put it another way, Shadow is the calm, pragmatic, precise professional, and Sonic is the happy-go-lucky adventurer just trying to have a good time and help a stiff loosen up. Shadow would never say he's friends with Sonic aloud, but Sonic absolutely would, and this annoys him to no end. Where a lot of Sonic vs. Shadow rivalries tend to fall flat for me is that they forget that Sonic has to be the instigator for their fights. And Shadow needs to either begrudgingly go along with it, like in this game, or be in a situation where he would actually enjoy the competition, like in their fight in Heroes. Or alternatively, they need to butt heads over a legitimate moral dilemma, like the Mr. Tinker situation in issues 5 and 6 of IDW, or their fights over what to do with Emerald in Sonic Battle. Shadow being overtly antagonistic to people that haven't done anything wrong yet, or over minor offenses, won't endear him to the audience, and will detract from any story he's in. He can't just be the moody rival character, there has to be more to him, or he might as well not exist. Shadow on the surface shouldn't care about their rivalry. By making Shadow the instigator and having him prioritize fighting strong opponents over the lives of others, you turn him into a poor imitation of Vegeta, a character that actually overtly cares about the safety of his friends and family, when Shadow's actual personality, re-flanderization, is a lot closer to Jotaro, Android Saga Piccolo, or Batman in the animated series. He's the Grim Protector, and Shadow's diction and tone when interacting with Sonic is important for getting those nuances across. In this route, Shadow isn't ever angry, aggressive, or antagonistic towards Sonic. He's dismissive and annoyed by him, and the way he speaks reflects that.
Don't waste my time. Not you again.
Another part of why recent Shadow portrayals have fallen flat for me is that Shadow is aimless. There's no real direction for his character, and nowhere for it to go. He has no goals aside from, I want to fight people, at this current juncture, which just isn't enough to base a compelling character around. In SA2, Shadow's goal was revenge for Maria, and every action and manipulation was in service of this goal. But on an instinctual level, he wants to protect everyone, best demonstrated in the Team Dark opening cutscene of Sonic Heroes, where he instinctually protects Rouge despite having no memories of her, and having zero reason to do so. He had a full character arc in SA2 where he came to care about those around him, and realized that revenge was never what Maria would have wanted, which had a large hand in him becoming such a beloved character in the fandom in the first place, beyond just being a cool design. At the start of this route, Shadow has a clear goal in mind, as nonsensical as the setup for it is. Get the Chaos Emeralds to learn about his past, which by the end of the route, transitions into wanting to protect the planet. Shadow has to actually want to protect people. He can still have his hatred for humanity, in general for what they put him through, but he still has to want to protect them regardless. In fact, I think Shadow hating humans, but still going out of his way to protect them, not just because it's what Maria wanted, but because it's the right thing to do, would go a long way towards giving Shadow fans what they want, and make him more engaging for new audiences. The line in 06, "If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight as I always have," is fantastic, and even resonates with people who hated Sonic 06. The way Shadow was handled there is one of the few compliments I can give 06's story. Shadow is the type of character that should want to protect as much innocent life as possible, and if killing someone will achieve that end, he'll do it with almost zero hesitation. Again, harkening back to the Emerald situation and his arguments about Mr. Tinker. In contrast to his stoic demeanor, Shadow also shouldn't come off as heartless. It's why he can be talked down from murdering Mr. Tinker, and why he goes back on trying to murder Emerald after spending time with him. You can still have him want to prove himself superior to other characters, and still have his priorities in order. These ideas aren't mutually exclusive. Tails and Knuckles were finally fixed in the IDW comics and Frontiers. They got their nuance back. Let's see the same happen for Shadow. This lack of focus or direction for who Shadow is as a person beyond surface-level traits brings us to our next point. Keep Shadow as an official member of G.U.N, alongside Rouge and Omega. The extra mode of this game has Shadow go through a training simulation or not. It's a smidge unclear which parts of it we are supposed to take seriously, given we hear Maria, Gerald, and Black Doom, who are all dead. Anyway, he's training to join G.U.N, and this was the direction that the series was going down in 06, as the commander refers to him as Agent Shadow, and sends him on missions. And in Sonic Forces, we see him as a part of Team Dark, going on missions, though it's never specified for who. But it can be assumed he's working for G.U.N forces, since that makes the most sense. Now that the organization isn't corrupt, but is still pragmatic in its defend the planet at all costs mentality, Shadow's a perfect fit for the organization, as their methodology is the same. Shadow is all business, no pleasure, which helped make his dynamic with Rouge and Omega so much fun to watch in everything they appear together in, and makes him a really good contrast to Sonic, who isn't a proactive superhero, who seeks out threats to stop. Team Dark should be an official team aligned with G.U.N, either as a mercenary group or an actual task force. It's very hard to get audiences to resonate with a character that isn't interested in what's going on. Characters act like they don't want them to be there and are an active hindrance to the story. Like in issue 10 of the IDW comics, wherein Shadow doesn't fulfill his role on the team, falls into Metal Sonic's trap, makes everything worse, and then in the following 2 arcs, proceeds to make the same mistakes over and over again. I love IDW, I really do, but people are correct to be upset with how he's portrayed in those stories, because of how unlikable and how much of a jobber he is. When Shadow shows up in a story, he needs to be a team player to some degree, and characters need to actually want him to be around to help. When you come across characters in this game, they are grateful for his aid, and Shadow performs the missions he's given with 0 complaints. While lines like,
No one tells me what to do,
make him come off as a child throwing a tantrum. He should really stop having lines like this, they don't make him look cool. At least he never says them to a character that doesn't deserve it. Lines like,
yeah, well, I'm not here to save you.
do work because he comes off like less of an idiot, and more like a tsundere, especially when Sonic takes it in stride. Making Shadow a member of G.U.N can also put him at odds with Sonic in ways that aren't just for the sake of drama, since Sonic is about freedom and anti-oppression, and while G.U.N is the government.
I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works.
And while not as shady as they once were, they still aren't that concerned with property or collateral damage, despite being run by decent people like the G.U.N commander and the president. God, I love this goofy picture. It should be in the background of any scene with the president going forward. It's so stupid it loops back around into being hilarious and awesome. G.U.N could work brilliantly as a neutral faction, rather than the good faction as they are portrayed in this game. A force that exists in this world opposed to the Eggman Empire, a force that just barely tolerates the Restoration, and one that's hostile to otherworldly entities like the Zeti, Black Arms, Donpa Kingdom, and potentially even the Wisps. Having a neutral faction that Sonic can be at odds with helps the world feel lived in, like there's a whole universe to explore beyond a spiky blue rat. And that's the kind of thing fans of this franchise eat up. G.U.N should feel like they are about on par with, or just a few rungs lower, than the Eggman Empire, and Shadow would neatly slot into the role of the Commander's Dragon, just like how Metal Sonic works perfectly as Eggman's, and would go a long way towards proving their legitimacy as a superpower. Speaking of the Commander, he's great, and should be a prominent character alongside Shadow in future entries. The Commander is the last remnant of Shadow's past still alive. He knew Maria personally and loved her just as much as Shadow did, which would give Shadow even more reason to be a part of G.U.N now that he's mellowed out, and no longer resents Shadow for what happened 50 years ago. Shadow willing to die to abate the Commander's anger once he's finished his journey, and the Commander's apology about how he treated Shadow throughout the game.
Shadow, do you read me? First, I want to apologize for the other day. Actually, I just became a grandfather last week, and I was thinking of maybe having you over. I know that training is tough, but try and do your best.
Feels genuine, and is some of the best writing in the game. It's unfortunate that the apology is tied to getting all the A ranks in the game, and even more tragic is that these narrative beats haven't been followed up on, either in the IDW comics or on screen in the games. Their bonding over shared pain and a desire to protect the commander's newly born grandkid would be more than enough reason for Shadow and the commander to form a permanent partnership, and help move past what happened on the arc. These are the things that should be explored on screen if Shadow is going to be a part of stories going forward. Speaking from personal experience here, just because you say you're putting the past behind you doesn't mean that you actually do, and it certainly doesn't mean ignoring it like the games have been doing for over a decade up until Sonic Frontiers. One of the things I loved most about Sonic Battle was that Shadow still occasionally talked about Maria like she was still important to him, and had flashbacks to previous events, despite that game only really making sense if it's after Shadow the Hedgehog, where Shadow, quote, put his past behind him, unquote. Part of moving on is acknowledging that the past happened, and using that knowledge to avoid those same mistakes, which is why flashbacks to Shadow's past on the arc could still be featured in future games. It's been established since SA2, and reinforced by this game, that Shadow suffers from PTSD, and getting to relive those moments would be a good way for the audience to get to know Shadow, the history of this setting, and letting us revisit one of the most iconic areas in all of Sonic, the Space Colony arc. There are so many benefits to doing this, both narratively and gameplay-wise, that it's genuinely difficult to list them all. You could compare Shadow's memories of Maria to Sage. We could see more of a younger Shadow, unburdened by the pain of losing everyone. Maria mentions in the flashback arc levels in this game how much Shadow loved running up and down the ramps of the arc, and seeing who Shadow used to be in contrast to who Shadow is now is a good way to keep the audience interested in his story, which is similar to what was briefly done with Whisper in the Tangle and Whisper miniseries, and could serve as a connecting point for the two interacting. Shadow and Whisper are both damaged individuals, and aren't handling their trauma in the best ways. It's also a good way to show continuity between the games beyond just name drops and references, and it allows the players to explore the Space Colony arc both pre and post falling apart. You can even show us more of Professor Gerald pre and post sanity slippage. Show us why Eggman idolized him so much. I've made it no secret how much I love All-Out Faction Wars. Two of my favorite games of all time are Divinity Original Sin 2 and Batman Arkham City, which can both be summed up as various big bads trying to outmaneuver each other, and our poor protagonists being caught in the middle of their power struggle. And with better writing and more time, that's what Shadow the Hedgehog's story could have done with G.U.N versus the Eggman Empire versus the Black Arms. It's why I want the Black Arms to return as another pure evil faction that's against everyone. But a lot of changes should be made to make them fit. The issue with the Black Arms isn't that they couldn't work. Influence work on Archie is proof of this. Shadowfall is amazing. It's just that a lot of the elements that could have made them interesting weren't given enough focus, on top of them just coming out of nowhere, and not giving us enough time to understand their relevance to the mythos and story like Sonic Adventure does with Chaos, and Sonic Frontiers does with the Ancients. This game is juggling a lot of ideas narratively, and not doing any of them justice, and the Black Arms suffer greatly as a result. Their goal of using the Earth's people as sustenance, the idea that they were on Earth before, their use of neural toxin, the idea of their hive mind network, and the idea that Black Doom thinks what he's doing is a good thing, are all neat ideas, but aren't given enough time to breathe. Their implementation leaves a lot to be desired. To explain how to salvage the Black Arms, we need to talk about how all ages media tends to work. You generally can't show sentient, sapient humanoid creatures dying in gruesome ways. And with that limitation comes innovation and creativity. You can't show the Joker outright killing people constantly on TV in the Batman animated series. So what do? Thus, the Joker toxin was born. It doesn't kill you, but it paralyzes you, and contorts your face into a hideous, crazed smile, similar to the Joker's. Characters aren't killed by this, but they might wish that they were, and the experience leaves them haggard. To use a few Sonic examples, roboticization in SatAM, and the Metal Virus from the IDW comics. Creative, striking imagery that raises the stakes in a way that can be undone. No new stories can be told with these characters eventually, but the audience still gets the sense of characters dying and being lost without resorting to fake-out deaths, which are cheap and generally poor form. Characters can also still suffer trauma after the process is undone. It doesn't feel like you hit a complete reset button when the process is reversed, which is a compliment I can give pre-reboot Archie. Now, with this understanding, let's talk about how to fix the Black Arms. Make their appearance less humanoid, and more eldritch in general. Maybe make them closer to things like the Black Bull, which is more insectoid-like, and Devil Doom, which is more draconic in its imagery. Make their weapons more overtly non-lethal in nature, designed for capturing sentient and sapient life, rather than killing it, to go along with the idea that the Black Arms aren't out to kill humans, but collect them. This would also explain why, when you attack the gun soldiers as Shadow, they just fall over on their backs, begging for mercy, rather than die for real. The goal of the Black Arms was to consume humanity and use them as livestock, which Black Doom viewed as saving humanity as a species, which doesn't really make sense. We never got to see what them using people as livestock would actually be like, so you can tweak this idea to be a situation where being used as livestock doesn't actually kill you. Instead, it's an agonizing experience where you are drained, paralyzed, and kept alive and aware. Something akin to this would make Black Doom's logic of being humanity's saviors make more sense, because he is technically preserving humanity for all of eternity in a form of stasis. They use this process of capturing different races and species to reproduce, adapt to different environments and planets, and conquer the universe. You could even retcon the reason why so many Black Arms soldiers were humanoid is that they were the result of feeding off of already captured humans prior to their invasion of Earth in this game. This would allow you to create more Mobian-like, for lack of a better term, I refuse to call them normies, Black Arms soldiers. I have accepted that Eclipse the Darkling will never be coming back, but you could still do something similar to Eclipse with this concept. The idea of the Black Arms being a hive mind, with only one intelligent creature guiding them, isn't really used very well. It's a good excuse for why Sonic and Shadow can kill these organic creatures without feeling a lick of guilt. That's great. But beyond Black Doom briefly controlling Shadow, and then Shadow fighting off that control with a pep talk from a recording of Professor Gerald Robotnik, they don't really do anything with it. And this concept only really comes up at the very end of this game's story, so it isn't given enough room to breathe, much like every idea in this game's story because of how it's structured. To look for an example of how to improve the hive mind, look no further than Dragon Age. In fact, in a lot of ways, the Darkspawn are just the Black Arms if they were well written, and were written for a mature audience in mind, rather than all ages. I'm going to go into a bit of Dragon Age Origins spoilers to talk about this, so be warned. That game is brilliantly written, and if you haven't played it yet, you should. Without an Archdemon to command them, the Darkspawn of Dragon Age just attack at random, with no real strategy or thought. The Black Arms should behave similarly, but taken a step further. Without a Black Doom to guide them, they are nearly completely inert. They don't seek out food, shelter, reproduce, or even attack. They'll attempt to defend themselves if struck, sloppily, but that's about all they can do. With a leader guiding them, they are incredibly dangerous, allowing them to fight on par with Gun's military and the Eggman Empire, and actively seek out biotic life to capture and use to produce more offspring. The Grey Wardens are linked to the Darkspawn and get a sense of what the Archdemon is trying to do, and even sense their location. Some can even outright understand what it's trying to say. Something similar can be done with Shadow. He's highly resistant to the mind control, but not outright immune, like portrayed in this game, and this allows him to sense their movements and get a sense of their intentions and plans. The Black Arms as a faction and Black Doom as an antagonist, if the Black Arms are to return, shouldn't be on the same level of threat and scale that they were in this game. At least, not initially. That could have worked theoretically for their debut, but now the moment is past. Instead, they should be a background threat that allows the other factions to spend resources fighting each other while they wait for a chance to strike. The Eggman Empire could very easily work with Gun and the Restoration to wipe the Black Arms out for good, effortlessly. But it's Eggman. We all know he wouldn't do that. He'd fight against everyone simultaneously, regardless of how infeasible such a thing would be in the long term, and Gun would be chomping at the bit to bring Eggman into custody, at long last. So they aren't going to budge either, which a truly unified force like the Black Arms can take advantage of, even if their numbers have dwindled to not even 1% of what they used to have at their disposal. This is actually why the Darkspawn were such a huge threat in Dragon Age Origins. It's not that they were significantly stronger, smarter, or had the numbers advantage, but because the nations of Dragon Age refused to work together. In Dragon Age, killing an Archdemon is largely a futile effort, because once you do, it'll just transfer its soul to the nearest Darkspawn, and it'll transform into the Archdemon. Something similar can be done with Black Doom, and it could be a chance to redesign Black Doom to be something more fitting of a Sonic game, or at least more interesting, since his design is honestly rather bland outside of his robe and Doom's Eye, which is just Starro. He's been MIA because he's been biding his time, waiting to grow his numbers in secret and try again. Given that the Black Arms have been on Earth before as established in Sky Troops, explain why they are so interested in humanity. You could even say Black Doom's defeat in this game isn't the first time he's been killed, and the reason he's so fixated on humanity is that they managed to best him before, which gives him more of a reason to want to use humanity to produce more offspring, and why he left those ruins thousands of years ago on Earth to make the planet easier to conquer for his return. Black Doom's boss fight is also the most interesting in the game, as he warps space to hurl meteors at you, and create deja vu replays of his actions to fight you. No wonder I have a soft spot for Black Doom. He's got Kefka and Bedman style attacks. Not only is this fighting style great to bring back for future Sonic games, you could even give some of these style of attacks to Shadow to further make him stand out from Sonic in addition to his Chaos powers. The last thing I want to talk about are salvageable gameplay elements. To be frank, outside of the ones I already talked about, like the extended cast being involved in missions throughout the game, and Black Doom's fighting style, there aren't too many elements worth salvaging here that the series didn't already salvage. Stages having multiple objectives is done in Frontiers, the improved light speed dash is in Unleashed and Frontiers, so is the improved rail swapping. Unleashed has a cohesive art style and aesthetic. There are two things worth bringing back and improving upon that we haven't talked about yet though. First is the triangle jump and the wall run. However, Spark 3 has this mechanic and has done a way better job implementing it, which is a game Morio Kishimoto, the director of Sonic Frontiers, has played, and plans on using that experience to improve future Sonic games. The second one is G.U.N, with an asterisk. The real issue with guns in Shadow the Hedgehog is that Shadow is the one using them. Never mind that he is a cartoon talking hedgehog, there's no reason for a speedster like Sonic, Shadow, or the Flash to use guns over a melee weapon that can keep up with them and extend their reach, and even that's a bit of a stretch. Shadow can shoot lasers, stop time, warp space, and run faster than any firearm imaginable. There's no reason for Sonic to use a gun. He can run hundreds of times faster than light if he really wanted to. He can manipulate the air and wind with his speed alone. There's no reason for characters like these to use firearms when they have their own way of closing the distance between their target or have natural ranged attacks built into their character. Now, Eggman, Tails, Whisper, Gemerald, and Omega, these characters can use firearms, flamethrowers, lasers, missile launchers, beam cannons, whiz-bombs, and other kinds of ranged weapons, and it would be both in character and a good way to set them apart from Sonic and Shadow in stages without making them significantly slower and more clunky to control. Give them weapons that they can cycle through that have their own utility for combat and for platforming, instead of having them pick up dropped weapons from enemies. And with that, there's nothing left in this game that's really worth salvaging. That's gonna be it from me. If you liked the video, please be sure to show your support by clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment on your thoughts, as well as follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and joining my Discord, which you can all find in the description of this video. The next video will be another episode of the worst Sonic level, this time covering Lost Impact, which I have a surprising amount of interesting things to say about. I hope you guys, I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video. I almost got cold feet when it came to uploading this one, and the reason it's taken so long to come out is because I was worried this isn't up to the quality of my last two. Anyway, until next time.